The smell of burnt wiring drifted through the lower halls of Corvain Station, mixing with the sharp scent of alien perfume from the banquet still going on 2 floors above. Daniel Hoyt pushed his cleaning cart down the quiet corridor, humming an old tune nobody on this station would ever recognize. He liked the night shift. Fewer eyes, fewer questions, fewer aliens staring at him like he was a strange animal in a cage. Corvain Station was not built for humans. The ceilings were too tall, the doors too wide, and the air recyclers hummed at a pitch that made most people's ears ache after a few hours. But Daniel had learned to live with it. He had learned to live with worse. 3 years ago, he had been someone else. A medic in a war most people had already forgotten, patching up soldiers in mud and fire while shells screamed overhead. Now he mopped floors and fixed broken light panels for creatures who barely looked at him twice. It was a quiet life. He liked quiet. Tonight, the station was hosting something important. He didn't know the details, only that extra guards had been posted everywhere, and half the maintenance staff had been told to stay out of the upper halls. Some kind of peace meeting between the big powers of the region. Daniel didn't care much for politics. He just wanted to finish his shift and get some sleep. He turned a corner near the diplomatic wing, dragging his cart behind him, when he heard it. A soft gasp, followed by the sound of something heavy hitting the floor. Then silence. Daniel's body reacted before his mind caught up. Years of training didn't just disappear because a person changed jobs. He left the cart behind and moved quickly toward the sound. What he found stopped him for only a second. A young alien woman lay crumpled on the polished floor, her long silver robes spread out around her like spilled water. Her skin, usually a soft lavender color from what he had seen in station broadcasts, was turning a sickly gray. Her chest rose and fell in short, panicked movements. 2 guards stood a few feet away, frozen, shouting into their communicators instead of moving. "Get a medic," one of them barked, though neither seemed to know where to find one fast enough. Daniel didn't wait for permission. He dropped to his knees beside her, his hands already checking her pulse, her breathing, the color of her lips. He had seen poisoning before. Different species, different chemistry, but the signs were close enough. Slowed heartbeat, shallow breath, cold skin despite the station's warm air. "She's dying," he said, more to himself than anyone else. "Right now? She's dying right now." The guards stared at him like he had grown a second head. One of them raised a weapon slightly, unsure if this human kneeling over their princess was a threat or a help. Daniel ignored the gun completely. There wasn't time to explain himself. He turned her onto her side, cleared her airway, and pressed 2 fingers against a point on her neck he had learned worked for a dozen different species during his years patching up allied soldiers from other worlds. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't even close to proper alien medicine. But it might by a few minutes. Minutes were all that mattered right now. "Where is the medical bay?" he shouted at the guards. They didn't answer. One was still yelling into his communicator, repeating the same panicked words over and over. The other seemed too shocked to move. Daniel made a decision then. The kind of decision that would later be replayed 1,000 times across news channels he had never heard of. He scooped the young woman into his arms, surprised at how light she felt despite her tall alien frame, and started running. "Move!" he shouted at anyone in his path. Aliens jumped aside, startled by the sight of a human sprinting through the corridor carrying their poisoned princess. Some reached for their communicators. Others simply stared, too stunned to react. He didn't know her name yet. He didn't know she was royalty, or that her death would have shattered a fragile peace summit involving a dozen different worlds. All he knew was that her lips were turning blue and her breathing was getting weaker with every step he took. The medical bay felt impossibly far away. Corvain Station's halls stretched endlessly, built for creatures far larger and calmer than the frantic human currently tearing through them. Daniel's lungs burned, his arms ached, but he didn't slow down. Behind him, alarms began to sound. Guards were shouting orders now, some running to catch up, others rushing ahead to clear the path once they realized what was happening. Word was spreading fast through the station's communication systems. A human was carrying the Sentinel Princess through the halls at full speed. Daniel barely noticed any of it. His entire focus had narrowed down to one thing: keep her breathing until they reached help. He rounded a final corner and saw the glowing blue sign above a large door. "Medical bay." "Open the door," he yelled, his voice cracking from exhaustion. "Now." The door slid open just in time. He burst inside, startling the alien medical staff who had been preparing for a routine night shift. Dr. Wenesilt, the station's chief physician, spun around at the sudden intrusion, her eyes widening at the sight before her. "She's not breathing right," Daniel said, laying the princess down on the nearest medical table. "Poison, slowed heart rate, shallow breathing, cold skin. You need to move fast." For a moment, nobody moved. The medical staff simply stared at the human standing before them, covered in sweat, breathing hard, blood not his own on his hands from where he had checked her wounds. Then Dr. Silt snapped into action, shouting orders to her team. Daniel stepped back, his job done for now. He watched as the medical staff surrounded the young princess, their instruments beeping and humming as they worked. He didn't know if she would survive. He didn't know what would happen next. But he knew one thing for certain. Whatever quiet life he had built for himself on this station was about to change forever. Word travels fast on a space station, faster than any ship, faster than any signal beam. By the time the sun cycle lights dimmed for the artificial night, every worker, guard, and diplomat aboard Corvain Station had heard some version of the story. A human janitor had carried the senile princess through the halls like a soldier pulling a friend from a burning building. Daniel didn't feel like a hero. He sat on a hard bench outside the medical bay, elbows on his knees, staring at his own hands. There was still a faint smear of something purple on his fingers, the princess's blood, or whatever her species called it. He hadn't had time to wash it off. A young alien technician kept glancing at him from across the hall, whispering to a colleague. Daniel ignored them. He was used to being stared at. Humans weren't common on Corvain Station, and the ones who were here mostly stuck to low-level jobs like his. Cleaning, repairs, nothing important enough to draw attention. Until tonight. The medical bay doors slid open, and Dr. Wenesilt stepped out, her long coat still damp with sweat from the emergency treatment. She looked exhausted, but there was something else in her expression too. Surprise, maybe. Respect, even. "She's stable," Dr. Silt said, walking toward him. For now. Daniel let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "Good. Whatever you did in that hallway," she continued, "it bought us the time we needed. Another few minutes, and we wouldn't have been able to save her." She studied him carefully, the way a scientist studies something unexpected. Where did a maintenance worker learn how to treat poisoning symptoms in an alien physiology he's never even studied? Daniel shrugged. "I didn't study anything. I just knew what dying looks like, no matter the species. Slowed pulse, cold skin, shallow breath. Doesn't matter if you're human or not. The body starts shutting down the same basic way." Dr. Silt raised an eyebrow, but didn't push further, not yet. Before she could say anything else, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed down the corridor. A group of armed guards approached, led by a tall, broad-shouldered alien with dark red skin and sharp golden eyes. Daniel recognized the uniform immediately, high-ranking Sentinel Dominion military, the kind that didn't show up for small matters. The alien stopped in front of Daniel, studying him with open suspicion. "You are the human who carried Princess Yura through the station?" "That's me," Daniel said simply. "I am Ambassador Droz, Chief Enforcer for the Sentinel Dominion delegation. You will come with us for questioning." Dr. Silt stepped forward. "He saved her life. He should be thanked, not interrogated." "He should be questioned," Droz said firmly, "because he was suspiciously close to the princess right before she collapsed. Humans are new to this station, new to this region. We know very little about your species, and even less about your intentions." Daniel didn't argue. He had expected something like this. In his experience, whenever something big happened, the people who acted fastest often became the first suspects. It was easier to blame the outsider than to admit you didn't understand what happened. "Fine," Daniel said, standing up. "Ask your questions. I've got nothing to hide." They led him to a small room a few corridors away, gray walls, a single table, no windows. It reminded him of interrogation rooms from his old military days, though the chairs here were built for much larger bodies than his own. Droz sat across from him, arms crossed, studying Daniel like he was trying to read a language he didn't understand. "Tell me exactly what happened," Droz said. Daniel explained everything, calmly and clearly. The sound he heard, the guard standing frozen, the decision to run instead of wait. He kept his voice steady, no exaggeration, no nervous rambling. Just facts. You are a janitor, Draws said slowly. Yet you moved and acted like someone trained in combat medicine. Explain that. I used to be a medic, Daniel said. Back on Earth, before I came out here. Different kind of war. Different kind of medicine. But dying is dying, no matter what planet you're from. Draws leaned back slightly, considering this. And why does a trained combat medic clean floors on a space station? Daniel's jaw tightened slightly, but his voice remained even. Because after the war ended, there wasn't much use for a medic who couldn't save everyone. I needed a quiet life. This job gives me that. For a long moment, Draws said nothing. The silence stretched between them, heavy and uncomfortable. Finally, the ambassador spoke again, his tone slightly less hostile than before. You saved her life tonight. That much is true, whether I like it or not. He paused. But someone poisoned Princess Urasenal during a peace summit meant to prevent war between a dozen worlds. If humans are somehow involved. They're not, Daniel interrupted. If they were, why would I risk my life running through this station carrying her? Why not just let her die and slip back into the crowd? Draws studied him for a long moment before nodding slowly. A fair point. The door slid open, and another guard stepped in, whispering something urgent into Draws's ear. The ambassador's expression shifted immediately, sharp and alert. The princess is awake, the guard said, and she is asking for the human who saved her. Draws turned back to Daniel. His golden eyes narrowed slightly. It seems your involvement in this matter is far from finished. Daniel sighed quietly. So much for a quiet life. Rumors spread through Corvain Station like water through cracks in old metal, quiet at first, then everywhere at once. By morning cycle, half the station's workers had heard some version of the story, and most of them had already picked a side. Some believed the human janitor was a hero. Others believed he was hiding something. On a station full of nervous diplomats and armed guards, suspicion spread faster than gratitude ever could. Administrator Bellowin sat behind his wide desk, rubbing the ridges along his forehead with 2 of his 4 fingers. He hadn't slept. The poisoning of Princess Urasenal during his station's most important diplomatic event in years was already threatening to unravel months of careful planning. If the summit collapsed now, if any of the visiting delegations decided Corvain Station wasn't safe enough to host peace talks, the consequences would follow him for the rest of his career. Tell me this is being handled quietly, Bellowin said to the guard standing near his door. Ambassador Draws has taken the human into custody for questioning, the guard replied, though he has not been formally charged with anything. Bellowin exhaled sharply. Good. Keep it that way. The last thing we need is news spreading that a human attacked a Sentinel princess. Sir, the guard said carefully, reports suggest the human saved her life, not endangered it. Bellowin paused, lowering his hand from his forehead. Explain. The guard did his best to summarize what had happened, the collapse, the frozen guards, the janitor who acted without hesitation while trained security personnel stood paralyzed by protocol. Bellowin listened quietly, his expression unreadable. So a maintenance worker outperformed my entire security team, Bellowin finally said, his voice flat. It would appear so, sir. Bellowin sat back in his chair, staring at the ceiling for a long moment. This complicated things. If word got out that station security had failed while an untrained human succeeded, it would be an embarrassment, but a survivable one. If word got out that the human had been arrested and mistreated despite saving royal life, it could be a diplomatic disaster. Release him, Bellowin said finally. Quietly. No public statements yet. I want to know exactly what happened before this story spreads any further. Meanwhile, in a small holding room several floors below, Daniel sat quietly, waiting. He wasn't nervous, not exactly. He had been through worse rooms during his years in service, worse questions, worse consequences for wrong answers. This was almost peaceful by comparison. The door slid open, and Draws stepped back inside, his expression harder to read than before. You are free to go, Draws said. For now. Daniel raised an eyebrow slightly. For now. The investigation into the poisoning continues, Draws said. You are no longer considered a primary suspect, but you remain a witness. And, he paused, seeming almost reluctant to say the next part. The princess has requested to see you personally. Daniel blinked. Me? You saved her life. It is customary among my people to personally thank those who do such things, regardless of species or status. Draz's tone made it clear he wasn't entirely comfortable with this custom being extended to a human janitor, but rules were rules. Daniel stood, stretching muscles still sore from the previous night's sprint through the station's corridors. All right then, lead the way. They walked together through the halls, guards falling into step around them, their earlier hostility replaced with something closer to cautious respect. Word had clearly spread among the security staff by now. Whispers followed them as they passed, some curious, some still wary. You handled yourself well in that room, Draz said unexpectedly as they walked. Most beings, when questioned by Dominion enforcers, either panic or lie. You did neither. Nothing to lie about, Daniel said simply. I just did what needed to be done. Draz glanced sideways at him. That is rarer than you might think. They reached the medical wing, where two guards stood posted outside a private recovery room. Draz nodded to them, and the door slid open. Inside, Princess Urasenal sat propped up on a medical bed, her lavender skin still slightly pale, but far healthier than it had been hours before. Her long silver hair, previously perfectly styled for the summit banquet, now hung loose around her shoulders. She looked younger than Daniel expected, younger and more tired, like someone who had been carrying heavy expectations for a very long time. Her eyes moved immediately to Daniel as he entered, studying him with open curiosity. So you're the one, she said softly, her voice still slightly weak from the ordeal. The human who carried me through half the station. Daniel gave a small, awkward nod, just doing what anyone would have done. Yura's lips curved into a faint, tired smile. No, she said, not anyone. My own guards froze. Trained soldiers, sworn to protect me, and they simply stood there, too afraid of making the wrong move to make any move at all. She paused. You didn't hesitate. I've seen people die before, Daniel said honestly. Waiting doesn't save anyone. Yura studied him for a long moment, something thoughtful in her expression. What is your name? Daniel. Daniel Hoyt. Daniel Hoyt, she repeated slowly, as if testing the sound of it. I owe you my life. Daniel shifted uncomfortably. You don't owe me anything. I just did my job, sort of. Your job is cleaning floors, Yura said, a hint of amusement in her tired voice. Last night, you did something far greater than that. Draz cleared his throat from near the doorway. Princess, you should rest. The investigation into your poisoning continues, and we still don't know who is responsible. Yura's expression darkened slightly at the reminder. Yes, of course. She looked back at Daniel. Will you visit again, Daniel Hoyt? I would like to properly thank you, once I'm stronger. Daniel hesitated only a moment before nodding. Sure, if that's what you want. As he left the room, Draz fell into step beside him once more, his expression thoughtful. You have made quite an impression, human. Daniel sighed quietly. Yeah, seems like it. Somewhere deep in the station, unnoticed by anyone yet, the person responsible for poisoning the princess was already planning their next move. 3 days passed before Daniel saw the princess again. 3 days of returning to his normal routine as best he could, though nothing about it felt normal anymore. Guards who once ignored him now nodded when he passed. Station workers who never looked twice at a human janitor now whispered his name when they thought he couldn't hear. He hated it. He had spent years building a quiet life, and now that quiet was slipping away one whispered conversation at a time. He was cleaning a supply closet on the lower level when a young alien attendant found him, out of breath from apparently searching several floors. Daniel Hoyt, the attendant said, Princess Yura requests your presence. Immediately, if possible. Daniel set down his cleaning supplies with a tired sigh. All right, lead the way. The walk to the princess's private quarters took longer than expected, weaving through halls Daniel had never been permitted to enter before. Everything here looked expensive, polished floors, soft lighting, decorations that probably cost more than he made in several years of station work. It reminded him just how different their two worlds really were. When he finally arrived, guards stepped aside to let him through without question, a small but noticeable shift from days earlier when he had been treated like a suspect. Inside, Princess Yura sat near a wide window overlooking the star field outside the station, dressed simply for once, without the heavy formal robes he had seen her wearing during the banquet. She looked healthier now, her lavender skin back to its normal soft color, though there was still a tiredness in her eyes that went deeper than physical recovery. "You came," she said, turning to face him. "You asked," Daniel replied simply. She gestured toward a chair across from her, clearly sized for a much larger being than himself. But he sat anyway, feeling slightly ridiculous as his feet barely touched the floor. "I wanted to properly thank you," Yura said. "Without guards listening, without my advisors watching every word for political meaning." Daniel shrugged slightly. "You already thanked me." "Not properly." She studied him carefully. "Do you know what it's like, Daniel Hoyt, to never truly know if someone cares about you, or only about what you represent?" Daniel considered the question for a moment. "Can't say I do. Nobody's ever cared much about what I represent." A small, genuine laugh escaped her, surprising them both. "You are very blunt for someone speaking to royalty." "Didn't think royalty wanted flattery from a janitor," Daniel said honestly. "Most would," Yura admitted. "But I find myself tired of flattery. Tired of careful words chosen only to please me or gain favor. Everyone around me calculates every sentence before speaking it. You simply say what you think." "Bad habit of mine," Daniel said. "A refreshing one," Yura replied. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment before she continued, her voice quieter now. "I have been the heir to the Sinal Dominion since I was very young. Since before I understood what that truly meant. Every relationship I have ever had has been shaped by politics. Every friend, every advisor, every guard, all of them see the crown before they see me." Daniel nodded slowly, understanding more than he expected to. "Sounds lonely." "It is," Yura said softly. "More than most people realize." "I get that, sort of," Daniel said. "Back on Earth, during the war, people didn't really see me either. Just the uniform, the job, what I could do for them." He paused. "After the war ended, I didn't want to be seen as useful anymore. Just wanted to be left alone." "And now?" Yura asked. Daniel offered a faint, tired smile. "Now I'm sitting in a princess's private quarters after carrying her through half a space station. So much for being left alone." Yura laughed again, softer this time. "I suppose I ruined your quiet life." "Little bit, yeah." They talked for a while longer, about small things at first, station life, Daniel's old work as a medic, Yura's early memories before the weight of politics fully settled onto her shoulders. It was strange, Daniel thought, how easily their conversation flowed despite everything different between them, different species, different worlds, different lives entirely. Eventually, the conversation shifted back toward the poisoning. "Do you know who did this to you?" Daniel asked. Yura's expression darkened slightly. "Not yet. Ambassador draws suspects it may be connected to factions who oppose this peace summit. Some believe continued conflict benefits them more than peace ever could." "Any leads?" "A few," she admitted, though nothing solid enough yet. Daniel frowned thoughtfully. "You mind if I ask something? During the banquet, right before you collapsed, did anything feel unusual? Taste strange? Any odd interactions with staff?" Yura considered the question seriously. "There was a food service drone that malfunctioned briefly near my table. It was quickly replaced, though I didn't think much of it at the time." Daniel's mind, trained by years of noticing small details that saved lives, immediately latched onto that piece of information. "That's worth looking into." Before Yura could respond, the door slid open, and Draz stepped inside, his expression tense. "Princess," he said quickly, "we need to speak. Now." Yura stood immediately, sensing the urgency in his voice. "What's happened?" Draz glanced briefly at Daniel before answering. "We've identified a discrepancy in the station's food service logs from the night of the banquet. Someone tampered with the delivery system." He paused. "And it appears whoever did this may still be aboard the station." Yura's expression hardened with determination. "Then we find them, before they try again." Daniel stood as well, old instincts stirring beneath the surface of his usually calm demeanor. Whatever quiet life he had left was about to disappear completely. "I might be able to help," he said, "if you'll let me." Draz studied him for a long moment before nodding slowly. "Given your track record so far, human, I believe we could use your help." The station's security office smelled like burnt coffee and stale recycled air, though Daniel doubted anyone here actually drank coffee. He stood near a wide table covered in holographic displays, feeling slightly out of place among the tall alien officers surrounding him. Ambassador Draz stood at the head of the table, arms crossed, studying the same displays with sharp focus. "Show him the footage," Draws said to a nearby technician. The technician tapped a few controls, and a series of images appeared above the table, security footage from the night of the banquet. Daniel leaned forward, studying the scene carefully. He watched as a food service drone approached the princess's table, wobbled slightly, then was quickly swapped out by station staff before continuing its route. "That's the malfunction Yura mentioned," Daniel said. "Correct," Draws confirmed. According to logs, the drone was pulled for routine maintenance shortly after. However, he tapped another control. Maintenance records show no such repair was ever logged. Daniel frowned, studying the footage again. So the drone wasn't actually malfunctioning. Someone faked the problem to justify swapping it out. "That is our theory," Draws said. "Whoever did this needed a reason to remove the original drone from service without raising suspicion. Why swap the whole drone instead of just poisoning the food directly?" Daniel asked. A quieter officer near the back of the room spoke up. "Security scanners check food chemically before service. Poisoning the meal directly would have triggered alerts. But the drones themselves aren't scanned as thoroughly, only their food containers." Daniel nodded slowly, understanding forming in his mind. So someone replaced the drone with one already carrying poisoned food, bypassing the usual scans entirely. "Precisely," Draws said. "Which means whoever did this had detailed knowledge of our security protocols. This wasn't random. This was planned by someone familiar with station operations." Daniel studied the footage once more, something nagging at the back of his mind. "Can you replay it? Slower, if possible." The technician complied, slowing the footage down. Daniel watched carefully as the drone approached, wobbled, and was swapped. He noticed something small, a brief flicker near the drone's identification marker, barely visible unless someone was looking for it specifically. "There," Daniel said, pointing. "The ID marker glitches for half a second right before the swap." The technician zoomed in, and Draws leaned closer, studying the image. "You're right. That's not standard behavior for these drones. Could be a signal jammer," Daniel suggested. "Something used to briefly interfere with the drone's identification system, long enough to swap it without triggering an alert." Draws turned to the technician. "Cross-reference that signal frequency with station access logs. Find out who had clearance to use jamming equipment that night." The technician worked quickly, fingers moving across holographic controls. After a tense few minutes, a name and location appeared on the display. "A maintenance technician," the officer said, reading the details. "Access logs show he entered a restricted service corridor near the kitchen roughly 10 minutes before the banquet began. His clearance level doesn't typically allow access to that area." "Where is he now?" Draws asked sharply. The technician checked further. According to current station records, he's scheduled for a shift in the lower cargo bay within the hour. Draws straightened immediately, already issuing orders to nearby guards. "Move quickly. If he's involved, we cannot allow him to escape or destroy evidence." Daniel followed as the group moved swiftly through the station's corridors, guards falling into formation around them. His heart pounded slightly, old instincts from his military days rising to the surface. This felt familiar, dangerous, and strangely alive compared to his usual quiet routine. They reached the cargo bay just as the suspect, a nervous-looking alien with pale green skin, was preparing to leave through a side exit. Guards moved quickly to block his path, weapons raised but not yet fired. "Stop right there," Draws commanded, his voice carrying authority that left no room for argument. The technician froze, eyes wide with panic. For a brief moment, it looked like he might try to run anyway, but the sight of armed guards surrounding him quickly extinguished that idea. "I don't know what you're talking about," the technician stammered as guards approached him. "We have footage," Draws said coldly, "and evidence of signal jamming equipment used near the princess's food service drone. Cooperate now, and things may go easier for you." The technician's shoulders slumped, panic giving way to resignation. "I was paid," he admitted quietly. "A lot of money. Enough to disappear afterward. I didn't know they planned to kill her, I swear. I was just told to swap the drone." "Who hired you?" Draws demanded. The technician hesitated, fear flashing across his face. "I don't know their real names. Just a contact through encrypted channels. They said they represented interests opposed to this peace summit. Said the Dominion's continued strength threatens too many independent factions who profit from ongoing conflict. Daniel exchanged a glance with Draws. This confirmed what they had suspected. Someone wanted the summit to fail badly enough to attempt murder. There's something else, the technician added nervously. They mentioned a backup plan, in case the first attempt failed. Draws's expression hardened immediately. What backup plan? I don't know details, the technician admitted. Just that if the poisoning didn't work, there would be a second attempt during the summit's final ceremony. Something more direct this time. Daniel felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. The final ceremony was scheduled for tomorrow, a large public event where dignitaries from every major faction would gather together in one place. We need to warn Yura, Daniel said urgently. Draws nodded sharply, already turning to issue new orders. Increase security around the princess immediately, and someone find out exactly what this backup plan involves before tomorrow's ceremony begins. As guards led the captured technician away for further questioning, Draws turned to Daniel, his expression serious. You noticed something my own trained investigators missed, Draws admitted. That signal glitch, most would have overlooked it entirely. Guess I got lucky, Daniel said. I don't think luck had much to do with it, Draws replied. Whatever instincts you developed during your war, they've proven valuable here. Tomorrow, we may need them again. Daniel nodded grimly, the weight of what was coming settling heavily on his shoulders. Whatever quiet life he once had was long gone now, replaced by something far more dangerous and far more important. The final ceremony hall was larger than anything Daniel had seen aboard Corvain Station. A vast circular room with a domed ceiling that displayed a perfect view of the surrounding stars. Delegates from a dozen different worlds filled the space, their voices blending together into a low hum of nervous conversation. Nobody outside a small circle of security officials knew about the threat still looming over the event, and everyone intended to keep it that way, at least until the danger passed. Daniel stood near the back of the hall, dressed in a borrowed formal jacket that fit poorly across his shoulders, feeling completely out of place among the elegant robes and polished armor surrounding him. Draws had insisted he attend, given his unusual instincts and his direct connection to the princess. Stay alert, Draws murmured beside him, his eyes scanning the crowd constantly. Whoever is behind this won't announce themselves. They'll wait for the perfect moment. Daniel nodded, his gaze sweeping across the room slowly, methodically, the same way he used to scan a battlefield for hidden threats. Years of training had taught him that danger rarely looked obvious until it was too late. At the front of the hall, Princess Yura stood beside several other dignitaries, dressed in formal robes of deep blue and silver, her expression calm despite the tension Daniel knew she must be feeling beneath the surface. She had insisted on attending despite the danger, refusing to let fear control her actions. She shouldn't be up there, Daniel muttered. She's the heir to the Dominion, Draws replied quietly. Hiding would send a message of weakness to every faction watching. She knows the risk. She's choosing to face it anyway. Daniel understood that kind of stubborn courage more than he wanted to admit. It reminded him of decisions he had made himself, back when running from danger had never felt like an option. The ceremony began with formal speeches, each delegate rising to speak about unity, cooperation, and the fragile peace they hoped to build together. Daniel barely listened to the words, his attention fixed instead on the crowd, searching for anything out of place. Nearly 20 minutes passed without incident. Daniel began to wonder if perhaps their earlier warning had scared the conspirators into abandoning their plan entirely. Then he noticed it. A service worker near the side entrance, dressed in the same uniform as dozens of others moving quietly through the hall, adjusting refreshments and managing minor logistics. Nothing unusual on the surface, but something about the way he moved caught Daniel's attention. Too stiff, too deliberate, his eyes darting nervously toward the front of the hall where Yura stood. Daniel's instincts, sharpened by years of watching for exactly this kind of behavior, screamed a warning. Draws, Daniel said quietly, nodding toward the worker. That one. Something's wrong. Draws followed his gaze, studying the worker carefully. He's cleared personnel. Doesn't matter, Daniel said. Look at his hands. He's not holding anything, but he keeps touching his jacket like he's checking something underneath it. Draws's expression sharpened immediately, years of training recognizing the same signs Daniel had noticed. Weapon, possibly concealed. Without waiting for further confirmation, Draws moved quickly, gesturing for nearby guards to converge on the suspicious worker while trying not to alert him too early. But the worker noticed the sudden movement of guards and panicked, reaching quickly beneath his jacket. "Down!" Daniel shouted, already moving. Chaos erupted as guards rushed forward. The worker pulled a small device from beneath his jacket, some kind of compact energy weapon, and aimed it toward the front of the hall where Yura stood frozen, caught between shock and instinct. Daniel didn't think. He simply moved, the same way he had moved that first night in the corridor, pure instinct overriding fear or hesitation. He sprinted across the open space, closing the distance faster than anyone expected from someone his size. The weapon fired just as Daniel reached the princess, tackling her sideways as a bright beam of energy sliced through the air where she had been standing moments before. They hit the ground together hard, Daniel shielding her body with his own as guards swarmed the attacker, wresting the weapon from his hands and pinning him to the floor. For a moment, the entire hall fell silent, hundreds of delegates frozen in shocked disbelief at what had just happened. Then chaos returned, but different this time. Guards shouting orders, medical staff rushing forward, delegates crying out in alarm. Daniel pushed himself up slowly, checking Yura carefully. "You're not hit?" he asked urgently. Yura shook her head, still catching her breath, her eyes wide with shock. No, I'm fine. You saved me again." Draws rushed over, his expression a mixture of relief and fury as guards dragged the captured attacker away. "The threat is neutralized. Princess, are you injured?" "No," Yura repeated, steadying herself with Daniel's help. Thanks to him. Word of what happened spread through the hall almost instantly, then through the entire station, then far beyond it. Within hours, the story reached news networks across a dozen different worlds. A human janitor had twice saved the life of the Sinal Dominion's heir, first from poison, then from an assassin's weapon, succeeding where trained guards and security systems had failed. The narrative that spread wasn't just about one brave individual. It became something larger, a story about an entire species previously dismissed as primitive laborers, suddenly proving themselves capable of extraordinary courage and skill when it mattered most. Humanity, long viewed as a minor, unimportant presence among the galaxy's major powers, found itself the subject of serious discussion in diplomatic circles that had never bothered paying attention before. 3 days later, during a quieter, more private ceremony, Princess Yura personally addressed a gathering of station officials and visiting dignitaries. "Daniel Hoyt," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the room, "asked for nothing in return for saving my life. Not once, but twice. He did not act out of duty to any government or hope for reward. He acted simply because it was right." She paused, looking directly at him. "The Sinal Dominion formally recognizes humanity as a species worthy of respect and continued diplomatic relations. Let this be the beginning of a new understanding between our peoples." Applause filled the room, though Daniel shifted uncomfortably under the sudden attention, never having wanted recognition in the first place. Later, once the formal ceremonies ended and most of the crowd dispersed, Yura found him quietly slipping away toward the maintenance halls, back to the work he actually understood. "Going back to cleaning floors?" she asked, a small smile on her face. "Someone's got to do it," Daniel replied simply. "You could have any position you wanted now," Yura said. "Advisor, diplomat, even personal guard, if you wished it." Daniel shook his head slightly. "Not really my thing. I like it quiet." Yura studied him for a long moment, understanding dawning in her expression. "Then I hope you find your quiet, Daniel Hoyt. Though I suspect the galaxy may not let you disappear so easily now." Daniel offered a tired, genuine smile. "Yeah, figured as much." As he walked back toward the lower levels of the station, mop and cart waiting exactly where he had left them days earlier, Daniel couldn't help but notice the subtle shift around him. Guards nodded respectfully. Workers who once ignored him now greeted him by name. Something had changed, not just for him, but for how an entire galaxy viewed a species they had barely noticed before. He didn't need fame. He didn't need recognition. But somewhere deep down, beneath the tired exterior of a man who simply wanted peace, Daniel Hoyt allowed himself a small, quiet sense of pride. Humanity had been seen, truly seen, for the first time. and nothing about the galaxy would ever look at them the same way again.